Welcome to the second installment of the Times Union and Jacksonville.com's Budget Chats with Mayor Peyton. Today we're taking a look at Recreation Community Services budget. That's one of the biggest ones in the city. It's worth $51 million, and it covers a number of areas from the Ritz Theater to the park systems to military affairs. It is also an area that is reducing by about $1.5 million this year. And we're joined today by Mayor Peyton and Deputy Director of Recreation and Community Service, Kelly Baree, to talk more about the circumstances in that budget. Welcome.
David, thank you. It's good to be back. I have my voice this week, which is a nice change, and appreciate the opportunity to have a more in-depth conversation. Today we're going to talk about a portion of our budget that is directly tied to parks and the maintenance of parks and the activities around parks. I think if you look at our city comparisons on park spending, this is the one area where I think we perform the poorest. We spend about $46 per person on our park system. The next closest in the state is Miami-Dade. They spend twice that, over $100 per person, and they're managing a facility department that's much smaller than ours. I think that the challenge we have with our park system is that while we spend the least by a large margin on the maintenance and operations of our parks, what that doesn't tell you is how big the system is. We're maintaining well over 300 sites with very, very limited dollars. We're mowing on average now 16 times a year. That clearly is the minimum we can mow, and I get complaints on a regular basis that it really should be more frequent to that. If we continue to cut this budget more, you can expect mowing closer to once a month, which is certainly not adequate, particularly in a rainy season like we have now. We have the blessing of having the largest park system in the United States of America, and I think it's one of the quality of life features that makes us competitive to attract businesses and families here. Between the natural resources of the St. Johns River, the Atlantic Ocean, great climate, and a wonderful and large park system, this is an area where I've really tried to see us make market improvement. The challenge is lack of resources, and we're spending so little on this large park system that the minimum standards are barely being met. My observation is this. We have park employees that really try hard. They do a good job. But when the grass isn't mowed or the garbage isn't picked up or the swing set isn't fixed or there's not programming in a park there where there used to be many years ago, it's not because our park employees aren't trying. It's because we're underinvesting. And every year when we have a tight budget, we basically look to this side of the government to trim. We hardly ever trim public safety for the obvious reasons of response time for rescue workers, for the civility on our streets with police presence. Those are fundamental government functions. So when we have a tight budget, we always look to the non-public safety sector, and parks is always a big target. And this has been one of the saddest parts of my observations is the underinvestment year after year after year. So we appreciate the in-depth coverage on this topic and look forward to good questions. I have with me Kelly Baree, who actually runs this division for us. And if we get into a real technical question, she lives in this field and toils in these fields every day, so I'll defer to her for more technical questions. Thanks, David.
Great. Mayor Peyton, thanks for joining us, you two with Kelly. And I wanted to ask you, you're talking a lot about employees in the park system, and I noticed this is a year where some 100 positions were going to be worn out of the budget through attrition to try and free up some money for other things. But the Parks Recreation Community Service budget doesn't seem to be as affected as other areas. It looks here from the numbers that I have in the budget, you're losing 5 positions, but you're increasing the part-time hours by about 3,900 hours. So it would seem that this is an area where the employee part of it is growing. What are the needs that have led to that?
Well, let me just start by saying this is an area in the budget that has taken cut after cut after cut, and we are performing at minimum standards today. We're trying to preserve a quality of life here as best we can. But I'm going to let Kelly answer in more detail the employee impact of the budget.
Yeah, the employee impact is that we are bare bones now with our staffing. We have a ratio that we like to keep. It's a 20-to-1 children to counselor ratio. And I'm to a point now that if we have anybody that's sick or goes to training or anything, that we cannot fully staff those facilities. So we're running into that type of issue when we start cutting down more. Your part-time hours are more your lifeguards and your summer counselors, and we've tried to beef those up somewhat so that we have a full, robust summer program that we're able to offer. But the actual FTE, full-time employee count, we have lost a few in that area. We hope to be able to continue with our services as they are, but definitely not grow or improve your service at all.
Okay. Well, I noticed with the part-time hours growing and the number of FTEs decreasing, is that a way to try to cover these services without full-time employees that would be requiring the health benefits, the pension costs, and all the other things that seem to be a drag on the budget?
It will help a little bit, but it will not be the full-time year-round employee. The part-time employees are the 25-hour week employee that is not there 8 hours a day, and our community centers are open, many of them 12 hours a day. So they will assist and be able to fulfill that ratio of the 20-to-1 ratio, but it will not definitely be able to be somebody that can staff those full-time programs that are running 5 days a week.
Mayor Peyton, your budget proposal painted a pretty grim alternative for this area if we don't go for increased revenues, that being the 12% proposed property tax rate increase. Could you describe some of these possibilities that came up in budget planning?
Well, this is the challenge I had as mayor is when we started looking at the budget, we realized this year we had about a $90 million hole. We were able to identify cuts that I think are responsible and necessary, and it's about a $40 million cut, and it's primarily with employee-related expenses throughout the government. When we began to look at cuts beyond the $40 million and into the additional 50, that's when you start to see the real diminution of services and the dismantling of programs that have been in place for many years. Clearly, there are a lot of opinions on this. My opinion, after looking at the list and trying to really decipher what would we do if we had to cut another $50 million, where would we go? It was clear that those decisions were starting to negatively impact the community. So it was my desire to try to protect our quality of life, make cuts, make $40 million worth of cuts, reform the pension program, but let's go and try to keep intact those things that I think we've been woefully underinvested in over time. So when we started to look at the list on the things that would be necessary to close down and stop doing, it became clear to me we would be seriously impacting our quality of life, which I think, by the way, makes us less competitive, harder to bring jobs here, harder to encourage families to live here, and could actually accelerate the trend that we already have in place where people are leaving the county. And there has been a trend for many years of people moving outside of the county but choosing to work here. Why would we do anything that would accelerate that trend and constantly erode the tax base? So parks are one of those things that, for me, have been kind of a special place in my heart. I think we're fortunate to have a great system. We don't spend enough to keep it in a quality system condition. We do the best we can with the resources, I believe. But again, it comes down to ratios. It comes down to mowing. This is not high-tech stuff. This is how often we mow, how often we pick up the litter, how often we're able to repair swing sets and things of this nature, and what kind of ratio we're willing to have with athletic activities, with counselors, with kids. And so this is an area where I would hate to see us do less because we're already doing so little, and I think it impacts our quality. So I had to weigh it. Do we increase the millage slightly, a modest increase, or do we have these draconian impacts to our quality of life? And my argument is, look, let's go ahead and do all we can to modestly increase the revenue just so we can hold on to status quo facilities and operations and programs in the city. Remember, the modest increase is about $97 to the typical homeowner a year, $8 a month. If you have homes less than $50,000 in appreciation, you're virtually homesteaded out. You don't get hit nearly as hard. To me, I think this is the reasonable, balanced way to keep this community intact as we suffer through what inevitably is a terrible recession.
There were talks about closing community centers, closing the Ritz Theater, and why is it that so much of those, as you call them, draconian impacts would fall right on this particular portion of the budget? It seems that $50 million, that's about 5% of the overall budget. Why aren't there other areas that could have been?
Well, this when you break the budget down, it really falls into two big buckets. You have public safety, which is about 50%, and then you have everything else. And when you lead the state in murder, you're the murder capital of the state of Florida. I don't think that reducing our sheriff's department is a smart thing to do. In fact, you could build a case that we should have hundreds of more officers on the street. Our ratios are low. Our investment is low with officers to population and dollars spent per police officer. So I'm not recommending we cut the sheriff because that basically would bring people off the street. When it comes to the rescue department, fire department, this is response time. The people we have deployed in that department all are EMTs. It's primarily a rescue department with occasional fires. 90% plus of our calls are rescue calls. And it is about how much time do we find acceptable in this community to respond to someone that's having a medical emergency. So in my estimation, we should not be cutting public safety. So then public safety, in my estimation, is off the table. That's not the agreement. Not everyone shares that opinion. That's where I stand. If we then look at what's left, then you return to libraries, parks, public works, those things that really do impact our quality of life in many ways. And that is, by the way, the side of government that has really been taking all the hits over time. Now, some will say there have been increases in public safety over the years, and there have been. But if you look at the increases, it is primarily health care costs, it is pension costs, and it's the additional officers. We have added officers in an attempt to make Jacksonville safer. So if you take away the new officers, the pension, and the health care costs, you would actually see a sector that is actually getting its status quo or even less. So we've been pretty good stewards, but in the environment where we find ourselves, where you're more likely to get murdered in Duval County than any of the 67 counties in Florida, this is not the time to be taking police presence off the streets.
To juggle back into public safety, there's also these elements that we were talking about and debating during the Jacksonville Journey planning of keeping kids busy, keeping kids off the street, kind of building a different attitude in people so that when they grow up that will start to fight this cycle of violence we have in the city. How does the recreation community service budget fall into that idea?
Well, I think, we just went through an extensive citizen-driven comprehensive approach to fighting crime. It's called the Jacksonville Journey, and a big part of that was finding ways to fight crime other than trying to arrest our way out of the problem, which I think we all accept is not viable. I think what we realize is that the cheapest dollar we spend is with kids, particularly at-risk kids, engaging them and involving them with organizations that can transfer those values to really set a better course for them so they have better options, make better choices, and have a better life. So it's a lot cheaper, by the way, than incarceration, which is $39,000 a year typically that the taxpayer foots the bill for. So when it comes to our parks department, which goes back to your question, David, we have a lot of land and some of it in really challenged areas where we'd like to see more programming, or we'd like to see someone show up with a ball and a glove and a bat on occasion and engage these kids in sports or activities that allow them to transfer values, where you learn life lessons, build relationships, learn how to work with your neighbor. Those things are important. So those dollars, while they're not expensive, can make a huge difference in the course of a child's life. So again, the park system plays a critical role in that. The activities we have in those program spaces, particularly in challenged neighborhoods, can really make a community safer and bring a community together, actually. So that's, again, the Jacksonville Journey is another why we'd advocate and not trying to reduce this particular part of the budget because of the positive youth development activities we programmed.
Mm-hmm. Part of the reason Jacksonville has such a large park system, I thought, were also state and federally protected lands. Mm-hmm. Are there other areas you can tap for revenue at this point, or have those been shrinking as well?
Listen, the state budget has been in a state of crisis. The federal government is now in a state of crisis. The private donors are at an all-time low. Finding those P3 partnerships is almost impossible in this environment. So where else do you turn? There really isn't anywhere else to turn. So a modest increase in the millage can help sustain the investments that, by the way, don't make it much better. Just keep it at the status quo level, which I would argue is underinvestment today, but it doesn't make it any worse.
Mm-hmm. What kind of reactions have you gotten from citizens on this area in particular in terms of the millage increase?
I think people are shocked when I show them the graphs that came out of the JCCI study, which I encourage our viewers and listeners to visit fixitnow.cc and link to the JCCI study, fixitnow.cc. The graphs that we show, as I move around town, I think people are shocked at how little we spend on police and fire relative to other cities in the murder capital, how little we spend on rescue, how embarrassingly low our spending is on park systems, on public works. Almost every way you slice and dice this county and our spending, we are at the very bottom of the list. And listen, I'm not ashamed of that. We should be proud of the efficiencies. But the question is, how low do we go? And at what point do we start diminishing our experience here? It's one thing to be cheap. It's another thing to be irresponsible. Mm-hmm. And I think this budget is a clear line of picking which we want to be. Do we want to continue to be cheap, or do we want to be irresponsible? And I would argue that just status quo continues to keep it on the cheap, but it keeps us from having the diminution of service that would occur over time.
Right. And we've talked a lot about these budget areas that are among the lowest in the state, or at rock bottom in the state in terms of spending. Today's is parks. Mm-hmm. The other day it was public works. How do you think we got to a point where we were the lowest? It was this culture of efficient spending that has just gotten to a point now that feels like it's at a breaking point.
I think two things. I think we have a superior form of government that allows us to experience efficiencies better than most municipalities, and that's a good thing. And we should always be cheaper because our form of government is more efficient. We've had rollbacks, which at the time probably were the right thing to do because the revenue coming in was so great. But when you combine the efficiencies we've captured and the lean organization we've been governing with a $100 million hit from Tallahassee through tax reform 2 years ago, which took away 10% of our budget, you combine that with pension increase, this year it's $40 million alone, and you combine that with a recession where we've had about a $30 million hit because we've lost $3.5 billion in our tax base in 1 year. You combine those things, it's really the perfect storm. We didn't have much margin for error, and then we had some bad things happen. And so now we've put ourselves in a situation where we've truly been compromised and our quality of life is at risk.
Mm-hmm. I've noticed in this budget there is another incarnation of a problem that's going on citywide, and that being with employee benefits. I notice your salaries in this department are going to grow by less than 1% last year, or in the coming year, and your employer-provided benefits, I'm assuming that's health, maybe a little bit of pension, growing almost 16%. Right. And how is this part of the problem?
Well, I think two things. We are in the market now trying to rebid health insurance. Our first glimpse, though, tells us it's not getting cheaper; it's getting more expensive. But that's what the marketplace tells us what the market is, and we put out bids and we try to get the best value we can. On pension, we need to reform pension, and in this three-part plan, part of Fix It Now is about cutting $40 million. It's about a pension reform that will save us close to $1.3 billion over the next 30 years by resetting the trajectory for pension benefits for new hires. And then, of course, the last part is a modest increase. I think you have to do all three to get us where we need to go. Otherwise, you're talking about draconian impacts.
Mm-hmm. And don't you have kind of a two-edged sword here? The parks funding is being hurt in part because of a lag in the economy and the property tax base decreasing, but at the same time, that same lag in the economy has had people looking for things to do that are virtually cost-free. So your public park systems are getting a surge in use. Mm-hmm. How do you try to balance that when you're looking at ways to trim in the budget? How does that?
It's tough. I mean, Kelly has the unfortunate job of trying to figure out, how to balance it. Here's the money, here are the needs. We know the needs are great. How do you make that decision? And it's a process you should go through. I mean, we should have competing dollars every year, and we do. But our park system, of all the things we do, the park system is the most malnourished, and I think it has so much potential. And that has been one of the most frustrating parts, is having this. We'd like to take from the biggest to the best, but just not having the resources. And I'll let Kelly add to that if she has commentary.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, most of our parks are free of charge. We do not charge for any participation for the most part. Hannah and Huguenot, obviously, are those that do charge. So it's a double-edged sword, as you were saying, that our budget is declining. We're asked to take reductions in it, but we're also needing to provide the service to the increased user that's out there. And if you look at any of the bigger cities, they all have big park systems that they're known for. Chicago has the Millennium Park and things of that. New York has Central Park. So parks are a huge part of those cities that are, the coming to the people.
And just to put that in perspective, Millennium Park in Chicago it's a $400 million expenditure to create that park. Parks are not cheap; they're really expensive. So you have not only the capital expense to make a park special, but then you have the ongoing operating, the maintenance of the land and the garbage and the safety and the programming. So to do it right, it takes a lot of resources.
And with these signature parks, one of ours is Metropolitan Park, which is a subject for next year's budget. It's my understanding that some $20 million in capital outlay is being put into Metro Park next year.
Well, we have several pots of money. We have several projects in downtown related to development projects that are not going to happen that freed up money. for Met Park, and then the rest of it will be financed over time. So the impact of this expenditure would be really minimal. In fact, I think it's a $100,000 impact this year to begin that project. But yes, we have to reinvest in parks, and we've spent so much money investing in water quality improvements on the St. Johns River. I'd like to spend money on water access to where people have an ability to get to the parks. Metropolitan Parks, it's old, it's in terrible repair. There's a plan now to open it up, get rid of all the chain link fences, make the kids area better, make the water features better, improve the entry from there. There's no sense of arrival or entrance to the park. Make that better, and make it more boat friendly. So it could be a really special place. When Met Park was put there, we didn't have a first class stadium with an NFL team or a ballpark or an arena. All the wonderful amenities around it. It is now the center of a lot of good things happening. A lot of visitors come to that area. It should be a first class place, a place that people want to go. And today it is not. We go there out of necessity, not because it's a beautiful, special place. And we're going to try to do that. Now listen, it's going to take time, and that what we have in the budget this year is probably 1/3 of the cost of what it'll take to get it right, all 40 acres, but it's a start.
And you had mentioned next year the immediate impact will be around $100,000, although we're talking about spending $20 million. I think that's confused a lot of people out there. You kind of give the government 101, the capital versus
you've got two basically ways we finance government. One is the recurring expenses, which is labor and maintenance and repairs, and then you have capital dollars, which is one-time outlay of money. Capital dollars are a lot easier to come by. You've got a capital list and things you program. We've had several development projects that were downtown centric, meaning the money could only be spent downtown, that aren't going to happen in the economy. There were some infrastructure requirements that we're going to try to meet, and the sale of the old library and the sale of the parking lot, the Jacksonville Landing, monies that have been cobbled together, and then the bonding of the remaining balance, which is basically taking a loan, to pay, and then you've got the interest charge on that. So the impact on the general fund next year is about $100,000, but it'll get us started with, in the high teens, be able to spend in the high teens, maybe $20 million to get this park going, but has virtually no impact on the operating fund and the general fund, which is where we have trouble balancing today, quite frankly.
And for that money that we'd be spending next year in capital money, what would we be seeing for it in Metropolitan Park?
We're still, we got to get the budget done first, and then we got to agree on a scope. But the kids' area is in terrible condition. We need to redo that with more quality water features, less fences, more picnic area. We need to open up that land. This is great flex space for all the major Georgia, Florida, Gator Bowl, NFL type programming, festivals, markets, things of this nature. It's open, so we have flex space. And then we have to work on the entertainment venue as well, and mainly on the grading and the slope to create more capacity for that venue. Also, there's no sense of arrival at Met Park. You hardly ever know where to go in. Where is the entrance? And we need to change that so people know where Met Park is and where the entrance is. So that's more of an architectural job. So making sure people can get to the river. There's more chain link fence and wrought iron fence in Met Park than all of our parks combined, I think. And we need to open it up to where you can get to the river easily. And you can see the river from all over the park and enjoy it. So boats would enjoy coming there if it were boater friendly and not so many fences. So these are changes that would obviously play to a larger plan to renovate the whole park eventually.
And I think there's still some people out there would look at as spending money on Metropolitan Park at a time like this is kind of the proverbial golden hammer. And how could you justify right now spending that money on?
Well, I think we can't shut down our park system, and this is a park that has millions of visitors around it a year because of these venues. The NFL team is there. It's a huge boat traffic goes through there, and the place is in terrible condition. And downtown is everyone's neighborhood, and it is a free facility. So taxpayers get to enjoy a nice place on the river for free. I think it's warranted to continue to invest, and the fact that we're doing it without really any impact to the general fund this year tells you that it's not a bad deal.
Right. And we talked before about this, the idea of business development based on these downtown parks and beautification, and how would that play in within the next year?
Well, I think what we've observed around the country with the cities all over the country is that your greatest property value is created where you have nice parks. Look, the most valuable property in New York is next to Central Park. You can build that case. It's true in Charleston. It's true in Savannah. The property values are generated by high-quality public spaces. If we're going to try to encourage capital investment in our city and encourage people to come to our downtown, which is a smart thing to do, because you've got the capacity to grow in downtown. You have capacity to handle the population that's coming here over the next 50 years, which our population is expected to double. If we're going to encourage people to come there, we should have amenities that are worth visiting. And I would argue that Metro Park, Friendship Fountain, and the Riverwalk are those type of amenities that, if managed properly, will encourage future capital investment when this market turns around, because it's that public space and the quality of that public space that ultimately I believe will drive value. We should encourage people to come to our downtown as this population grows. We do not have to build libraries. We don't have to build schools, fire stations, police stations, all there. The infrastructure is there. All the road work's there. Fiber is there. You don't have to recreate community like you do in the suburbs. So it's in our best interest to invest there, encourage people to come there, and grow as inexpensively as we can.
But earlier we were also talking about the soft economy has put a lot of down projects sort of on the back burner right now. So does that put any more importance on trying to redevelop that park right
What
now?
we know now is this economy will turn around eventually. Our population's scheduled to double in 50 years. This is the time to invest. We're getting the most competitive bids for every project we do. We're putting people to work. Metro Park, if we can get that, is 150 people working. So you put more people to work with more competitive bids. You create value on the river and in our downtown, which I think will spawn capital investment in the urban core over time, which is important to our tax base, which I think will bring the return on investment the taxpayers should expect.
Mm-hmm. Now, what would be Metropolitan Park's version of the mirrored bean in Millennium Park, or the reflecting pool in Central Park? What sort of a draw do we have? I'm thinking of Friendship Fountain. Mm-hmm. What sort of a landmark do you think that we can
at Met Park? Mm-hmm. Well, I think the openness should be a number one draw. I mean, that flex space gives us enormous capacity to do a lot of different things. If you remember, during the Super Bowl, we had the NFL experience, and we had over on the other side of the river, we had the entertainment venue on Bay Street. Those were there because we didn't have the space around the stadium, and plus we had a security boundary issue. But that should be the flex space in the future. So that should be, if you want to throw a frisbee or spread a blanket and have flex, that's the kids feature with the water, the higher quality water features that with picnic opportunities on the river should be an attraction. The entertainment venue, which that has enormous potential. We used to have the old Starry Night series, which was a great opportunity to showcase that venue. The facility has really become run down, and it should be part of the phasing of this park to make sure this is you got the parking, you got the river, you're in downtown. That should be the premier outdoor entertainment venue. So I think all three of those work together: the entertainment venue, the open space, and the kid-friendly water features and river access, and the boating community access. All those things will be, I think, a part of a new Met Park. And I think Friendship Fountain offers enormous capacity, too. I could see someday an architecturally significant museum there with the fountain, with more open space, more marina space, to where that could be the crown jewel of the urban park system.
Great. I think Tia has a reader question for us.
I have several, so you all just let me know how much time you have. Someone on Cover It Live says the Parks Camp program helps so many Jacksonville children and their parents during the summer. What will happen to the Parks Summer Camp program? And I'm assuming they mean
if the
with or
millage is cut.
without the millage increase.
Kelly?
Without the millage increase, obviously, we will have to cut some of those services. Right now, we serve 1,800 children in our summer camp program, and it's offered at 21 different locations. So with the millage cut, there will be some decreased services on that. We will not have as many spaces. And it also, we receive funding from the Children's Commission to provide camperships for some of the children that do attend, and we will have reduced amounts of those scholarships available for children to attend summer camps as well.
You want me to ask more?
Go for it.
Let's see here. Which communities, Matt asks, which community/senior center do you propose closing?
We don't have an exact list of those centers yet that we will close. We will look at the radius of other available facilities that are in close proximity to each other, which services can be combined to be the least impact to the community, but we don't have an exact list. We'll also work with council, on what we're proposing to cut also.
And Mayor Peyton, just to remind people, how many, if the millage rate is not increased, how many community or senior centers should be cut?
We talked about 10, closing 10, and again, everyone's list of priorities is different, but we had to create a list. If we had to cut $50 million, what it would look like, just for our own edification, and we said it would take probably about 10, closing 2 fire stations, 5 libraries, 10 community centers, just to begin the list, and the list goes on from there.
We're starting to get into these other areas beyond parks. We talked a lot about parks so far, but parks within this budget is only, about a fifth of the budget or so? I think it's around $8.9 million. One of the areas that I saw a lot of growth in was in Veterans Affairs, military affairs. Looked like that portion of the budget was going up about $2 million. What is going to be new in that area?
Well, right now we're in the fight of a lifetime to secure a nuclear aircraft carrier, and we've brought in some additional resources to help our congressional delegation work the Pentagon to make sure that we're in good position. Virginia is trying to take this away from us for obvious reasons. The economic impact of a carrier is tremendous. They do not want to share any of their carriers. They have put an army of lobbyists on this case, and we've tried to mount up to make sure, not to the full tune of that budget, but a portion of that is to really offset what Virginia is investing to ensure we don't get a carrier. Some would say, well, we shouldn't spend money on that. Well, that's fine. Virginia is. They have lobbyists working it every day. Failure to do the same puts us at an extreme disadvantage with the risk of losing the carrier.
So has the city hired a lobbyist, or are we just
we have.
contracting?
Admiral Natter, retired Admiral Natter has been hired. And, of course, we just recently hired Bob Bune as the new Director of Veterans Affairs and also Military Affairs Services. So we have good resources on the case, as we should.
And by the same token, I think a lot of our delegation is really fighting this out, too.
They are. I mean, we're using everything we've got to make sure the Navy follows their own recommendations. And Virginia is legislatively trying to derail the Navy's plans. We're working to keep the plans restored.
Aren't there other complications with this, too, in terms of dredging to be able to get the aircraft carrier in?
Well, yeah, there's waterfront improvements. Basically, what the Navy said, let's go ahead and make those needed changes that take a long time to permit and to construct. Dredging is a part of that, and also waterfront improvements to the bulkheads. So those are the funding battles we're fighting today, those expenditures. Those are necessary. Those are critical path items, by the way, for a carrier, and those are the early lead items.
Dee, do we have another reader?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Roland asks, where does the city stand on the Pocket Parks initiative? Can the city create a way that local communities can spend their time and resources improving these small parks throughout our neighborhoods?
Kelly, you want to take that one?
Sure. Right now we have, 2 pocket parks that we are working on. They're both over in the San Marco area. They do connect to the waterway. We don't have a huge initiative to increase pocket parks, obviously, because that's additional that we do have to provide for. We're always interested in community participation and support with our pocket parks, and any park for that nature. So if there are any that's interested in developing and maintaining those pocket parks for us, we're always interested in hearing from them.
Kelly, when I think of pocket park, I think of 2. The one across from the Florida Theater, and then the one when you come off the Acosta Bridge. And those are relatively well maintained, I guess. But, who knows if the budget is cut, what kind of quality they'll be over time.
Correct.
And there are probably some other downtown parks. Those are the 2 I think of right off the bat.
Jesse D. Smith, right across from the Florida Theater, is very well maintained. It's a heavily used park.
A lot of folks have suggested we bring on partners to help maintain these parks, but I will tell you, in this economic environment we find ourselves in, finding partners that are willing to contribute dollars is almost impossible. We can find people to help pick up litter and things of this nature on occasion, but it's been a challenge.
You mean adopted by the Kiwanis Club or Rotary or something like that? It's I think an interesting point throughout this entire area too. We talked a little bit about this earlier, the idea of private partnerships. What about trying to get more industry involved, maybe private groups, leagues, sports leagues, and stuff like that to try and help benefit this park system.
Remember, we have over 1,500 volunteers in our system today. I mean, it's not for lack of having volunteers. With our little leagues and our sports teams, we've done a good job there. But as for finding people to write checks to make improvements or to maintain, very difficult challenge for one reason. A lot of businesses say, look, that's what I pay taxes for. You know, why should I write out of pocket when I pay taxes to maintain public land? That's been a barrier. But not to say we aren't trying. There was a great park study that was done with great leadership from Rufus Pennington and others. They recommended more joint venture partners, but easier said than done. It's challenging to find people that are on a reoccurring basis, write checks every month, every year, year after year, to maintain a park system.
Mm-hmm. What I'd seen in the budget figures that the parks use is expected to be up 20%, but the anticipated charges for services are expected to be down by about 3.5%, and I'm wondering how can that be?
Back to you, Kelly.
That's the services that are charged, Hannah Huguenot, for the most part. We are seeing some increase in participation, but we expect to have a decrease because of the economy, the down of the economy.
When you raise the price,
Right.
your visitations usually go
And
down.
a trend off, and we hope that it does come back up. Also, you know, with our parks, people are doing staycations now. That's the big buzzword now. And they do visit those parks that aren't charged. They'll come in for a ball tournament at Drew Park or, you know, to some of our free venues. Come down to Metropolitan Park to Kids Campus where it's also free.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
in terms of revenue, you bring up an interesting point that you can't really charge your way out of this because you'll get fewer people to come. But for longer range planning, the idea of developing a park system, is there a way of developing, say, a $250,000 parks type fund, or maybe some type of an income tax for a parks fund?
Okay. Well, income tax is illegal in the state of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, can you dedicate a mill? I think it's healthy to have competition of the taxpayer dollar. I think it forces efficiencies when you have everyone competing for the dollars. So I wouldn't advocate that. I think the challenge is the pot we're pulling from is too small, and all the needs we have I think are barely being met today. And to have diminution of service on top of that is the real challenge. But you know, you can have fees, and we have a situation where there are fees. But again, you raise the price, you decrease your volume in many instances.
Do we have another question?
Yes. Ashley asks, what is going to happen to the Equestrian Center? Are the rumors about closing it down true?
We spend close to $700,000 a year operating the Equestrian Center. Remember, the Equestrian Center was built from the Better Jacksonville plan with capital dollars. There were no maintenance dollars associated with that plan. I think it's safe to say that if you have a competition where you're considering fire stations, libraries, and community centers, and an equestrian center, the Equestrian Center loses. But again, that would be a decision that would be made by council. This is budgeting is part of their responsibility, and I think in this environment, if we had to trim it out of $50 million, I think it's highly likely that it would not survive. That'd be my estimation.
Another area that was being looked at closed was the Ritz Theater, and I understand you were there the other night and got a lot of resident feedback. One of the stories I heard was that some of the residents had presented you with dollar bills as a symbol of wanting to pay to keep it open.
I think this is it's a treasured resource in this community. 30% of our population is African American. We have a lot of the culture and history of that community in that museum, and that entertainment venue is a well-used facility. We spend probably close to $700,000 a year running the Ritz Theater. Again, when the Ritz Theater started to compete with fire stations, libraries, and community centers, and things that other people want to see, again, I think it's on the chopping block. Again, that would be a decision by council, not my recommendation to close it. I'm not recommending we close the Ritz or the Equestrian Center. But again, I think when you debating between fire stations or theaters, I think I know politically which one usually wins.
The council president has talked a lot about the need for more sports parks. And I'm wondering, in this budget, it looks like even though it is shrinking, I'm wondering if there are any more sports parks coming in to the system, any that are being built this year.
Well, for someone who's committed to balancing this budget without a millage increase, I don't know how he intends to pay for that.
And noticed that the Huguenot and Hannah Park budgets were down about $2 million. Is that just strictly from anticipated fall off from higher fees, or are there other trims to those services?
No, it was just the fall off of fees.
Okay, do we have another?
Yes, give me 1 second to catch up. Okay. Yes. Someone asks, will the redevelopment of Metro Park include a greater degree of connectivity Sorry, I pressed
Between
something. Hold
downtown
on.
and the stadium?
Let me see here.
Well, let me talk about
connectivity.
connectivity. I think one thing we realized with Met Park is that there's so much fencing and compartmentalization on the facility.
Yeah, to the rest of downtown.
Right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you just can't get there. I mean, without pole vaulting fence after fence after fence. So our hope is that the Shipyards property will eventually be completed as a Riverwalk. That'll connect to Met Park, and you'll have that seamless connection with all these wonderful amenities that we have planned with the Riverwalk going into downtown. Right now, you're right, it's kind of on an island and it needs to be connected. But the Shipyard plan has always been to build a first-class Riverwalk that would connect it. A lot of the infrastructure for that Riverwalk is in place now. Close to $20 million has been invested with the basically foundations of the Riverwalk. And in my estimation, the Shipyard's property will probably revert back to the city, and that will be the ultimate connection.
What is up with Shipyards right now?
Well, right now they're in foreclosure. The city holds the first mortgage, so I think it's highly likely that the city will end up back with this property, and we'll probably know more by the end of the summer.
Well, doesn't that set up the potential for the city to have to generate more money, or what will be a cost for the city involved in that?
Well, the Shipyard's a complicated deal, and let me just try to explain it. Early on, the deal before I took office, there was a deal in place where the city would issue bonds to pay for public improvements for a Riverwalk that would connect downtown to the Metropolitan Park. We took office. We had a hard time seeing where the money was drawn out of the account. It was hard seeing where it had been invested. There were grand jury investigations and so forth and so on. The settlement basically was that we bring on a new developer, which was Landmark. They would fulfill the commitments to build the Riverwalk, and then the taxpayer would be made whole over time. About $20 million worth of those improvements have been made to date. The company's gone bankrupt. And so the city would probably get the property back, and also the bond payments that the new developer had actually assumed would come back to the city. So we have put into this budget the assumption that we would then start paying the interest on the bonds that have been issued for the improvements that have been built.
Does this take land on or off the tax rolls of the city to back right now?
The land would be off the tax rolls if the city owns it, and we would have to assume the mortgage payments.
One area of the budget that I wanted to go into here was the behavioral and human services portion of recreation and community services. I noticed that's up about $1.5 million. What is it that people are getting for that $1.5 million in that budget?
Behavioral and Human Services offers receives a lot of grants from both federal and state, and that's the victims advocacy, that type. It's all of the victims portions of it, and so they are receiving additional grants, things of that nature. They have a lot of state mandates that they're required to carry out, so that's where you're seeing those dollars come from, but they provide the criminal.
And some of that is Medicaid.
Victims.
Remember, the state has the luxury of mandating things we do and having us foot the bill for it as well. So in this particular line item, you're either seeing a state mandate forcing us to do it, or you're seeing a grant that's been awarded that would cause the budget to go up, and we are the recipient of the grant. So either one of those, but it's not because we are intentionally trying to grow this government.
Public perception throughout the recreation community service budget has run the gamut. You'll hear everything from people who say we should put less money into parks to people who think that we should put twice as much money as we do into parks. I'm wondering, from what your position is, obviously, that we need to invest more in this area. Mm-hmm. And of reasons you've heard from the public, what would be the most compelling you think you've heard so far?
For why we should invest?
Why we should invest?
I think the maintenance and the programming. We have our maintenance is not at a quality level. We do as good a job as I think we can do for the people we employ and the tasks they have before them. But the mowing schedules are light. Garbage pickup, things of this nature, and it's not because our people aren't trying. Let me just be very clear. I think we have very dedicated employees that try to do as best they can with limited resources. But I think the ongoing maintenance of the facility, and then the lack of programming. I mean, we had a lot of land with nothing programmed for kids in the neighborhood, and I think there was a day when the city did a pretty good job programming parks, and there was always something going on in the park for the families, and we have cut that out. It's labor intensive, it's expensive, and we've suffered as a result of it. I think having kids roaming the streets because there's not programmed activities in public places is a public safety issue.
I think Tia has another question.
This one, Mayor Peyton, is a general question, but one that I think people have been asking. How is the Fix It Now campaign being funded? Roland asked that question.
Yeah, there's a website that was actually developed in-house. Excuse me. Actually, Adam actually bought the website, the fixitnow.cc, on his personal credit card. But the actual design of the website was basically done in-house with our IT personnel. Those are really the only expenses that have been incurred. Any collateral material, buttons or flyers, have been, for the most part, bought by private citizens.
You said Adam bought the website domain. You mean your chief of staff?
Yeah, I think that's $19. I think he spent $19 on the domain.
He tells me he also funded the spray paint, the wash away
Chalk.
spray paint, chalk paint
yeah.
for the campaign
Yes.
too.
Yeah. Really, Fix It Now is really it's about access to information. There's really no great expense associated with it. It's a central place to gather information about this budget, to link to JCCI, to link to council members, to communicate with media outlets. So it's more about sharing of information than any great expense.
That information has always been public before. Why did you feel the need to campaign on this to build
I
a website?
I think to build support for what we're trying to do, because raising a tax is not popular. Obviously, everyone has a knee-jerk reaction against raising taxes. We need to have a theme. We need to have a central gathering place, a repository for information, with critical dates, with information, with links, and frequently asked questions. This is a hot conversation, and if we're going to propose raising taxes, we need to provide easy access to all the information anyone could ever want to understand why we're trying to do it and why we should do it.
I think this access to information, everything we're talking about right now, when the budget is passed this year, it might be good to keep this conversation going, to look at.
We're going to have to keep it going because the budget gets voted on September 22nd. I think we'll start on September 23rd. Trying to mitigate what's going to happen next year, because I think it's safe to say that our tax base will continue to shrink with the declining economy and employment going up. So this is not a one-time drill. I mean, we're going to have to continue our work as we finish out the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm. Do we have any more readers?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Joe asks, is there any initiative to transition some of the many vacant properties in Springfield into pocket parks or community parks like Murray Hill and San Marco have?
Back to you, Kelly.
We have not looked into that. I have been working with the neighborhood department on identifying some of their properties that have not been developed out for affordable housing, to be able to move in with community gardens and things of that nature, that the extension office would assist the neighborhoods in developing that. But specific vacant properties, we have not looked into neighborhood parks with that.
And then, since we do have a little bit of time on our hands, okay, this is a good one from Bob. What is the status of finding a replacement for the Lanny Road flying field? The Veterans Cemetery, a great thing for Jacksonville, is slowly creeping closer and closer. And I know that you guys have been talking about this.
Yeah, Kelly, you've been working with this challenge.
Yeah. We continue to look for property because of some of the requirements that the Flying Association, their national organization, requires for safety zones and things of that nature. It takes considerably more property than the 16 actual developed acres that they have at Lanny Road. So we are working with the Flying Club to identify property. It's difficult right now, though, for a single-use property to identify those 300 acres.
It's
You need 300 acres?
That's there. I'm working with them. We're trying to get that down a little bit, but I know Councilman Holt is working with them for another alternative location. So we're trying to get the acreage down, but initially they wanted 300 single-use acres.
I think when you go through an exercise like this, you realize how much of our county is really developed out. For land that has not been developed, there's probably a PUD of some sort for it to be developed. So when you're looking for 300 acres really for the airspace and not encroaching on residents or future residents that don't want the buzz of an aircraft overhead, it's a challenging. It's a challenging assignment.
I think what we've seen today is this particular budget, recreation community services, has a wide array of uses. Is there any that you think we're leaving out right now in the discussion?
Things that we should be funding that we're not?
Oh, just things that we should go over in this budget to explain to people what we're paying for.
Well, I think it is. What has happened is we've reorganized this government twice. And in so doing, we've put a lot of government functions together that weren't together before, so it is a comprehensive budget. But we've tried to eliminate our overhead and the number of division heads and department heads that we've typically had to save money to deliver more effectively for the taxpayer. So, yes, there's a lot under this bracket, but any other way would cost more because you'd have more department heads, more divisions. So it's pretty comprehensive.
Do we have any more readers?
I'll let you respond to this. Bob, but another Bob, it appears, basically makes a comment that the Fix It Now campaign is propaganda and is spreading fear. And I know you've heard that. Some council members have maybe not said it in such harsh terms, but they have kind of said that, and that there's some misinformation that's being spread through Fix It Now. How do you reconcile some of that criticism?
That's just not accurate. There's no misinformation on Fix It Now. I think the only dispute we've had is the list of things we'd recommend. If I, as mayor, was charged with extracting $50 million out of this government, I've gone through what I think that list would look like. Everyone's list is different. Every council member's list is going to be different. Every citizen's list is going to be different. My point of this is to say, look, to extract another $50 million out of this government, it is naive to think that it won't have a draconian impact. And by the way, failure to raise the millage rate this year, I think, makes next year even worse as far as the diminution of services to a level that I think accelerates trends that we don't want here, quite frankly. Now, I recognize there are people that think government is evil and it should be starved, and we should fund nothing, and we should drive on dirt roads. And to that thought form, I don't agree, and I think our city's future is bright and is worthy of investment. So, I really believe our city is a place that has a great process of trying to make itself better, and this diminution of service would not be a part of that.
Okay, and Roland asked, and this maybe can be the last question. Roland asked, the 2009 JCCI report on city finances suggests opening the budget process. Fix It Now is a good start, but it advocates a particular position. Is there a way the budget processes can be more accessible to the public without advocating a particular position?
I absolutely agree with that. Government budgeting is archaic by nature. I've certainly found that to be true coming from the private sector. And deciphering $1 billion budget in this organization is not easy. And one of our takeaways from that study, which I completely agree with, is how can we make this process more transparent and accessible. The budget is accessible. Anybody can get a copy of the budget, but making sense of it is the challenge. And I realize when I try to put the budget together, I have a lot of resources around me that help me decipher what I'm seeing. Because when you talk about monies coming in and out of this organization, federal grants, state grants, partnerships, there are a lot of nuances that without an explanation don't make sense just looking at the numbers. So we're trying to break that down and decipher it. Fix It Now is a beginning, but I think that's clearly there needs to be more transparency, and we're working with ideas from JCCI and staff to make it really just user-friendly and accessible. I think that's a really good point. It was challenging for me coming from the private sector to decipher it, and without interpretation, I think it'd be challenging for anybody.
Okay. With that, I think that's time for us today. Mayor Peyton, Deputy Director Berea, I'm glad you could join us today. And we'll be doing this again tomorrow at 11 a.m. where the topic will be arts and culture. Thanks also to Jason Pratt, Tia Mitchell, and Jonathan Bennett.